Okay, so I thought I'd record a very quick video to show you the setup that I'm using to solve the Advent of Code challenges this year, and it's also an excuse for me to set up the new laptop that I've got for screen recording, which has been a little bit of a pain to do because it's got a high resolution screen and my screen capture software really doesn't like that. So apologies if there are any technical issues. I'm also using a separate USB microphone. Hopefully that's picking up the audio okay. But as you can see here, I'm using Visual Studio Code, which is an absolutely brilliant environment for doing programming in almost any language, but it's particularly good for JavaScript development. And I'm using Node.js and ECMAScript 6 flavour of JavaScript this year, really to just try and improve my skills in it a little bit. The last couple of years I've solved all the challenges in F#, but I really wanted to try a different language this year. So what I've got is I've got my project set up, and you can see all this on GitHub if you're interested. I've got a folder for each year, so in November I actually went through all the 2015 puzzles and solved them just to kind of get myself up to speed, and that was mostly a case of just porting my F# solutions into JavaScript. But this year I've been doing the same thing, one solution a day. We're on day 17 at the moment, and in each folder for each day I have a text file that contains the input for that day and a solve.js file which contains a method called solve, and that gives you the inputs from the text file in the form of an array with one string per line and the part number of the puzzle that you're going to solve, because every puzzle is in two parts. And also in this file I put an expected value which I fill in once I've got the correct answers for my input, and every user in Advent of Code has their own specific input, so you can't copy someone else's answers. Once I've got my input I put that in, and that just helps me against any regressions if I refactor some common utility code. So to run my test I type in this integrated terminal, and I really love the integrated terminal in Visual Studio Code. It's an excellent little command line with nice features of cut and paste and control click to follow hyperlinks and things like that. But if I say node index.js, and then I can just say the day number, so let's solve today's 17th of December, and it just runs the two parts and checks that the answers match the expected values. If I don't pass in the number and run that, it will run through all of the days from this year and just check that each day has got the correct answer. And as you can see, as we've gone a bit further through the days this year, the puzzles have got longer and longer to solve. Hopefully not too long. This one's giving it a bit of trouble. That's a 10-seconder. And day 18 isn't found. Another thing that I've got set up is some Jasmine tests, and Jasmine tests are particularly useful if I want to just test a small part of each solution in isolation. So for example, today I've got a spin method. If I wanted to just test this spin method on its own, I'd add it as an export, and I'd create a Jasmine spec for that, although I haven't done that for today. But to run those, I use npm, and then I just say npm test, and that runs through all of the Jasmine specs that I've got. Another really nice feature of Visual Studio Code is it's very easy to debug your way into your JavaScript code. So say I was debugging day 16, I can just put a breakpoint in here, and then I can just go into this debugger tab and just start debugging. Now by default, Visual Studio Code, it will just start your index.js file, and as you saw from earlier here, that means it would run through all of the solutions for each day. So I want to pass specific arguments to it, and you can do that if you configure a in this .vs code folder. If I configure an extra sort of launch profile configuration in my launch.json file, I've got one here that I've called specific day, and it's still going to run index.js with Node, but it's going to pass the arguments of the year 2017 and the day 16. So that will mean it's going to jump straight to calling this method. So if I go back to the debugger, and I've already got specific day selected, so I'll just say start debugging. And straight away you can see I hit the breakpoint, I can step over, and I can then just hover over a variable like this array of instructions to see if I've parsed it correctly. And I think it's probably a screen resolution issue here that's causing the debugger to behave a little bit weirdly in terms of what it's showing me. Let's see if I can hover over a string there, it's showing me that string value. But I think if I hadn't just changed my resolution on this laptop, you would see a much nicer view of what was inside this instructions array, as opposed to this tooltip which has just gone wrong a little bit. But apart from that demo not quite going according to plan, hopefully you can see Visual Studio Code is a really excellent environment for running your JavaScript and Node.js projects. If you haven't checked it out, do so, and also take a look at some of the extensions. I've got things like ESLint extension, which gives me some hints in the code editor when I use an undeclared variable, or I follow some kind of poor practice in JavaScript. So if I, for example, just remove that let statement, you can see ESLint is warning me that second is not defined. So I hope you found that interesting, and you can follow along my progress in the Advent of Code challenges on my blog at markheath.net.